I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
Hello, good evening and welcome to another WEBSTER report. Little bit of technical issues just for a change, but we've managed to get started. So we'll make a start with that video because we have been in multicultural mode for a while, and all I can say is, Alex, that it's a good job that these people who wear small hats haven't got anything to do with it, but it does sound like they might have something to do with it. What's your take on that for the opening gambit?
Multiculturalism in and of itself shouldn't really be a problem in some ways. So, like, for example, if we go for a Chinese or an Indian, you know, ultimately, in terms of cuisine, for example, it can enrich our lives. There's so many other things from other cultures which can enrich our lives. So I'm a product of two cultures. So my mother came from Belgium, and I look at certain things like where we have fish and chips in this country. They have chips and braising steak from their chippies. And you think, well, is that really that significant? Well, if you don't travel, it's not. But one of the great, when people talk about the university of life, traveling in other cultures can really enrich you. I think the problem is not so much the multi aspect of the culture, it's the types of culture that they are. And if those cultures are radically different to the culture that you're used to, then you've got a clash. And as we know, there are certain people who are promoting that clash for what we might call, you remember Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson talking about the culture war. That was a fashionable term. People don't use it as much now, but it's still there. And basically, there's a guy called Kurt Doolittle. He was basically a libertarian, and he developed a theory called propertarianism based on libertarianism. And Doolittle did a lot of work on this, and he talks about high trust and low trust cultures. And a lot of the Middle Eastern cultures and East European cultures, for example, very low trust, whereas West European Germanic cultures were always traditionally high trust cultures. So when you take people from low trust cultures and insert them into high trust cultural settings, it isn't the multicultural aspect that's the problem, or the diversity even, provided it's under control. It's the fact that the value base is often different. So we can see that, say, with radical Islam coming in, that could be a problem. But it's the cultural moorings as well. It's issues of trust. It's how people transact with other people. If you can't trust your neighbour, if there are certain things you can't take for granted, which trust typically means, there are a set of assumptions that you can make that you don't need to be questioning every 2 seconds, because there could be somebody in the next street who doesn't view it the same way as you. Like, at one time you could leave your front door open in the 1960s in this country and you'd never get robbed. And that perhaps doesn't apply in the same way today. There are always these changes, but there are certain things we used to be able to take for granted in a high trust culture, which unfortunately now we can't. So if we go immediately to the people with the agenda, yes, there are people with an agenda. Yes, they are promoting it. Yes, it is culture war. We've got to start, I think, on the actual common ground that we all share. Like, what is the actual problem? Because there's the people who are promulgating it and making it happen, and that's a problem. But there's another level of the problem, and I think we need to understand the problem at the level that it is a problem, because if we don't, then we'll say that multiculturalism is bad per se. Multiculturalism is not bad per se. In many ways, we would benefit a great deal from having more Chinese influence from Chinese culture in our culture. I don't mean the triads. Already,
I take it you don't mean the social security construct either.
Well, that's not Chinese culture, is it? That's a political device that's been imposed by the ruling regime, and that actually the people of China are more agreeable with than we would be. So it's not quite the same. It's being deployed in a different way in the West. So I don't mean that aspect of culture. There's a lot of folk culture which is very beautiful that the Chinese have got, and they've also got a certain honor code and manners which we've lost in the West. I'm not saying that's high trust, but it's high value. So there are certain things, I'm just reluctant to just portray it as multiculturalism per se, because even the American multicultural model is different to ours. The distribution of cultures is different, the mix is different, and therefore the issues that you face are different. But overall, yeah, I mean, you're right.
I think what we can hang our hat on is that when immigration happens naturally, when people want to come here because they don't want to be in a society where they've grown up. You know, we know Muslim friends of ours whose families left those areas where Islamists were running, where that culture was imposed, and they came to Christian countries because they don't like that. But then you see that that culture's coming over here now, and that's being promoted, and they are taking areas where, because if there's a load of Scousers that move to an area, they tend to flock together. Manx, Scots, Welsh, they'll create a community. So I get what you're saying about the culture, because it's been natural over here. We've integrated so many things that I grew up in that I'd say is English. You could break it down to cultures from all around the world. That's not what I'm getting at. It's when we're seeing forced migration, where there's policies being set, where borders and border controls have been eradicated through Europe. Europe has been decimated. I believe they just had a vote in Parliament in Europe about to stop all this migration and start mass deportation. Now, is it too little too late? What happens over here? Because we've seen petrol and diesel go up sky high. Garages around here have been closing because they've been running out, because people naturally aren't panicking necessarily because it's running out, but because of the price of things. You know, £1.50 for petrol. That's unheard of when we're going back 26 years where they were blockading Stanlow because it got to 99 pence a litre. Yeah. It wasn't going to go to £1. But again, we were naturally, we had all our natural energies, coal, we had endless amounts. Let's stop that. Oh, gas and oil, let's stop that. Let's buy it in instead. Let's not look after ourselves. Let's spend everything going out. And we took our eyes off the shop that we owned. We've hired these managers and then sodded off, done all the graft for it, and we've not checked up on these people. And while we've not checked up on them over decades upon decades, after 2 wars, where you've given an education system where people believe what they're being taught. We can't pay your bills, Alex. It's such a simple concept that if you are grooming from children into adulthood and they don't notice there's anything wrong because everybody else it happens to, you know, it's the extreme cases where we say, hey, that's not normal. But when these not normal things are happening within families, they naturally think that other families do this, but they keep it quiet as well. So it's not hard when we take away this myth of money, which is just in our minds, this concept. We work for nothing, Alex. We work for pieces of paper. If we could turn that into equity between each other and understand it as such, we could change everything. All this arguing that we see about council tax and people paying bills, we know there's a presumption that's going on in courts, and they presume that all property is deemed commercial. Why? Because, as we've said before, it looks like when Mr. or Mrs. Register a property, those titles cloud it because it could be commercial. Well, let's not tell them about it and let's presume that it's commercial. Let's write to the shopkeeper and see what happens. Everybody does it, so the ones that don't want to do it, we can deal with. You know, once that remedy had come out, they had to go a different tact. That's where the fraud all spilled out everywhere. But the thing is, what happens if you go to the land registry, AP1 form, say, look, I believe there's a mistake been made on the registry. It needs correcting because under a presumption, there could be fraud being committed here. Now, you're putting land registry on notice that they're possibly joint enterprise, but they're in a possibility of committing fraud with other people. So they have to rectify it. When they rectify it, what presumption could they have in these courts then? For me, it looks like it would show the hand wide open. And I think that's the root cause. You know, I'm sick of dealing with these surface pains, contracts, all this stuff that they'll agree that there's no contract with, because that's not what we're standing under. But we're not going to tell you what we're standing under. They're standing under a presumption that all property is commercial. Let's stop that presumption. Once we do that, then all this starts to fall away. But they're rushing it now, Alex. I mean, I've seen just this week in some of the groups that people are challenging companies over smart meters and things like that, that I only want this meter. There's no point arguing with these companies because they are being forced to follow government policy under climate control. And it's the government that are saying that every shop has got to have a smart meter. And you have no say in that because it's commerce. So for me, I think you're dropping a bomb on one of the biggest, metaphorical bomb, I should say, on the biggest parts of the establishment. It wipes out all the presumptions. For me, that kind of levels the playing field a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the perfect solution to the ruse. It requires implementation. Now, as we know, with the powers that be, people speculated, this might sound a bit left field, but people speculate what happened to Jim Carrey. Did he say too much? Has he been offed? So people wonder where he is. Normally, if somebody dies, you go, oh, such and such died, he got whacked. And, you know, but just disappearing, you know, you're always a bit suspicious. Is it just a story? But the big, you know, the more high profile you become and the more problematic you become. So small people generally get left alone. They're not going to send the snipers out for them. But a big celebrity that makes a big stink and creates ripples is an influencer. So people will basically, oh, right, we're going to, you know, you saw it with the GC math and, you know, basically trying to get somebody done for murder on health grounds and stuff. They bring the heavy artillery out. So whereas normally they might allow a blind eye to be turned, if it creates precedent, then they're in a really difficult spot. Then you're playing Russian roulette as to whether they decide that they're going to silence that via, you know, non legitimate means. So I think it carries like a degree of peril, but objectively, that would be the way to do it, because, as you say, the con is that people don't understand that they're standing on the wrong ground. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to see what Land Registry do. Now, obviously, you mentioned, I think it was Carl sorted stuff out with his V5. Now, you know, cars and properties were stepping up a level.
It's still the registration. It's the registration. Yeah. I saw when those titles were omitted, and he got correspondence from the DVLA stating that, unfortunately, they couldn't register the vehicle, and that would cause issues for legislation that the police use. However, he could still tax and insure it. So I didn't see the downside to it. The police can't apply driving legislation, commerce to that vehicle. What is it now then? Is it a mechanically propelled something, or can we just call it a car for argument's sake, because now you can't presume anything? You know, it's going to come up as not registered, but how many times are you going to keep pulling somebody up and saying it's not registered? And the DVLA say, yeah, we can't register it. Well, I've got it taxed as MOT and it's insured. What are we doing? What's the presumption there? What are you going to take them to court for? You're going to go in, they've got to go into the sea. They've got to go into the commerce. And they're going to try and drag you off land and into the sea and it's quite clearly that the vehicle is not being used. It's not a clouded title on it. Whereas when Mr. registers that car, it's a possibility that it's being used. Well, look, it says private goods. Well, goods is commercial term, and private is also a commercial term. When you hire a private hire taxi, it's still private. You're still having goods in it. You're having individuals, you're having persons. It's all the same language, but you're in the sea. If you take that presumption away, it clears the way then for you to be able to direct. How would we go about doing that on a scale of where people do it with a court of record and things like that? And how difficult is that going to be? You yourself every constabulary was given notice with those documents, all signed, all notarized, everything. All you needed was numbers. Well, I don't want to be with the people who are standing in these courts saying, I'm a man, I have no contract. I want to be with the people who are saying, do you know what? This root cause of the fraud, what do we need to do? Where do we need to look? Where do we need to put these lights on and let the cockroaches run? Look at the Privy Council. Look at who's making all the benefits from this. Who's taking all the money? Why are we paying for bills that we shouldn't be paying for when we've already paid? Why can't we snap out of that, Alex? Why is there such a delusion there that people cannot see the facts that are right in front of them? You know, it's like shouting at your family and saying your house is on fire, and they're saying, no, it's not. The flames are around everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just a bit warm. Open window, love. You know, I don't know how else you can put it out to people it had to be given in simple terms for me to understand the simplicity of paying for something up front in a bargain, in an agreement that you're going to do this for these benefits. So if, for argument's sake, I'm going to agree that they're going to take so much money to manage my country, my company that I've got a share in, whilst I do that. So whilst I was handing toilet rolls out, you're running my company, and I'll do that. And you can spend and you can do the infrastructure, and because you've got the experts and you've got all this. If we were in control of all that, as in acting as a man, using that monopoly piece and taking all that presumption away, because it's the presumption that's killing people. When you take that presumption away, Alex, it exposes them. The bollock naked with nothing to shout at. You owe us this money. Why? Where's this money? Where do you owe me this? You know, it's the 10, 15-year-old, years old remedy. Well, give me a signed contract, give me a bill of exchange, and show me the accounting, and I'll pay you what I owe you. Well, under presumption that you owe me, I can't prove that, Alex. Alex, you owe me £1 million.
Yeah.
I can't prove it, but I presume that you know that you owe it me. So if I've got my mate who's the judge saying, yeah, you owe him because we're going to stand under this, and look at where Alex is stood. Alex is stood way over there. He doesn't even know where we're standing. And look how much equity's in that property, all those properties. We're going to get a fair share while this lad gets these £1 million. Let's stand with him, because him who will be deceived, let him be deceived. And ignorance of the law is no excuse. But when you've got to rebut everything that they presume, and they're not going to tell you what they presume, that becomes an impossible task. And you're directed to go to the solicitors that are under their control, that they will not go around. So you're in a closed shop, Alex. You're groomed into it by your parents because your parents were groomed into it. It's trying to shatter shatter through that. How do we stop people just shouting things out about I'm a man and this? Let's find out what the true remedies are, and then start doing it through the correct channels. You know, notice land registry. Hey, do you know that this title is being used? You know, 3 titles all sold under one title. There's a problem with that because there's no signatures. You can't produce any signatures. You've told me that you only need a county court stamp. Well, that is only for commerce, because if I'm saying no, I'm not selling my property, how are you taking control of that? You call down police on me. You see how it just falls apart. They've got to then, they can't just keep obfuscating, but it was always down to numbers.
Yeah, well, I think you started off with a question about, how will we get people to recognise the things that are in plain sight? The point is, they're not in plain sight for most people. You shared this for quite some time, having found it yourself through the pain of your experience, and you're expressing it. And I think actually the resistance you've got has been very frustrating. But whenever you get resistance, it forces you to refine your argument more and more. This is one of the things about the nature of debate and reason. Although it's painful, my friend Ray wrote this book called The Myth of the Closed Mind. He's a philosopher. And he said, actually, it's popular for us to talk about people having closed minds, but in reality, they don't really. It just looks that way. And it often takes time, and you've got to refine your argument over time. But as you do so, and you keep coming up against these barriers, you can really focus it in. And in your case, you identified what the issue was. So, all these people who are going in court still and saying, I'm a man, they're objecting on sort of moral and principle grounds rather than grounds of the legal system that's been set up, which is a fudge. So until they see through that, they're using principles and morals that actually are not recognised anywhere. So as you rightly said, it's jurisdictional. But most people don't see that. And it takes them a while of being reasoned with. And I think it was me, director, said in the chat, I tell everyone their electric is free and they think I'm nuts. So, many people get this reaction. There's a lot of incredulity. And so things happen at two levels, really. It's what the system has evolved over time. It's not like somebody turned up like 30 years ago and said, we're going to implement this system. It's had a grip, and a growing grip, over many centuries. So it's in a blind spot for people. And as you say, people have been socialized into it. So then what we're dealing with is this: how do they become aware of it? And what do they do with it? And that is the $1 million question. You've got to get through to people first so that they see it, but then they've got to be able to find the courage or the support structures to be able to take the system on. Because as you've said many times yourself, unless somebody actually does it, and we've had people on the show who've actually come on and said, I'm starting to do it, and we've not had any updates for a while. But clearly the point is that people, you can see that they're deluded on some level, and yet so many people are. So it's a consensus reality that has to be broken down. It does take a lot of time, and it will eventually take action from people. Will have to act in order to turn the ship around. Now, when they do so, it's going to be a different ball game. So, like you were saying with Carl, when he did this with the car, that's a result. And the question then is, well, how do you build on that? How do you share that and build up momentum? That's what has to happen.
Yeah, and I think doing stuff like that can give you that gap. I mean, if 10, 15 years ago, people were where they're at now, I think everything would have changed, Alex, because they did. The court system lost it. I would say there's a period of time there certainly between 2013 and 2015, going into 16, the court system had become locked. There's people in there not with arguments. They were in there with really good remedies. I know people who they lost everything, but the paperwork was spot on. They were just dabbling in liens and things like that against government organisations. And you've got to rebut all these presumptions. So despite you being right, you still couldn't defeat the beast. You couldn't beat the big boss. You know, you could get past certain minions and knock certain things away, but it was a constant fight. You know, there was a period of time, Alex, where it felt like I was in court at least every week. If every other week, if not every week, it felt like that for a period of time. And when I wasn't in court, I was in court, unless I was at work. It was when I look back on it, it's like when when the curtain drops and all the magic has just gone, and you can see all the workings and the mechanism, and you see, well, oh bloody hell, that does that, and oh no, that can't be right. So you then argue with yourself, you start battling, and you can't understand that everything looks like you shouldn't pay this bill because you should act this way because you're a creditor and creditors act this way. And I'm like, well, why have I been taught to act like that? And when you're sat at land registry with somebody legally trained who tells you that they don't need signatures to change title deeds, well, what did my mum and dad do with the property that was inherited? You know, did they work for nothing, Alex? Because that's what they're telling me. They worked for nothing. They didn't register anything. They didn't register the equity. They registered the shop. Instead of, the shopkeepers there going, yeah, I'm open. Yeah, there's no equity there, though. We can't see it. So we're going to stand over here saying we can't see the equity. You take the cloud away, all of a sudden you can only see the man that's registered the property. So for me, that would make a logical step. But again, you've got those people that you were just touching on there that want somebody else to do it first. I had it 10, 15 years ago. Let me know how you get on. Oh, I've got this and I've got that. Well, yeah, we all have. Well, at the moment, I think I've just seen an article today that in the last 5 years, council tax debts have gone up 70%. There's a debt collector every minute being pointed towards collection. This is on a presumption of a commercial tax being attached to property that's non-commercial, but they're pretending it is. And I know people personally that have unalived themselves, mate. So there's some dirty gets that are playing this game, man.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's got to be a multi-level approach because you become aware of it. There's a very small number of people who really became aware of it, and not just became aware of it, suffered the pain of it. Like, if you really have to go to a place that nobody else has to go to, you understand what's at stake in a way that even the person who kind of sees it doesn't have the investment in, because pain touches a person at a soul level, and it's got a downside because it can create trauma. When you feel pain to that level and injustice to that level, it's incredibly wounding. And
the brain doesn't see it any different to a physical trauma either. It's a car crash. It's a car crash.
Well, and I think so. It's very double-edged, and I think that that there have to be other strategies, and I think the reason that we struggle to get traction is because other forces have undermined what might at one time have been called very glibly community spirit. But community spirit's it's a real poor substitute for what is actually at stake. But most people can respond or grasp or understand what community spirit actually means on a very basic level. It's related to this question, excuse me, of high trust cultures and the fact that there's more chance of developing a cohesive, consistent response that you're suggesting, Paul, en masse, when you've got a high trust type culture. That is being diluted all the time. and it's
that's another, sorry for interjecting, but that's another part of the war strategy, isn't it? Because now you've brought those communities up, you brought the family up, you brought the family up, you brought the communities up, you've got broken bits of chaos that is waiting to be moulded into the remedy that they've got ready for just the right conditions. You know, we know how much psychology they've put into this, Alex. Within 2 weeks, a human being can become cannibalistic under the right pressures. So we know that they've done this. They've done their own work. It's how people still can't see that we're having hailstones and things the other day after all kinds of spraying that's going on, and high winds again here now. Oh, it's just a weather pattern. Oh, it's climate change. It's this. Well, what are they spraying? You nuts, Webby. You know, I was being called nuts 15 years ago. And people who were doing that now talk about sun dimming, you know, as a government policy to help against climate change. And you're like, do you actually interact in this same world? You remember we were talking about that fractal realities and how some realities just don't interact, and people are taking out your life. You know, people you never expected, you always expected to be in your life are just not there. And you start to see a reason why that reality is, you know, it's what the observer sees. Your faith and the hope is in what you can't see. Because if it's already there, then it's there. This is what you've got. So if we're planning and we're interfering, you know, we're making a big mess when we don't know who we are and we don't know what language we really speak, because we're speaking English, but they're not listening to English. You know, do you reside there? Yeah, shop. Next, you know, it's my mum always said, the words you use, you must understand what you're using them for, otherwise you'll get yourself in trouble. Well, how many times do we think we're putting a good case across by saying, I'm a man, I've no contract, these are two correct things, but that's not what they're standing under. And if you don't touch on that, then it's just all win-win-win for them. And you realise that's not a fair game. But then their answer to that is, not our fault you don't know. We know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some really pronounced issues here that we've got to take very seriously, because the culture war isn't something that just happens on one level, and this deception isn't something that happens on one level, or that got sneaked in a few centuries ago and is just, you know, maintained itself as if it was separate from the culture. It isn't separate from the culture. So what I would do as a way of illustrating what's at stake here, because these are really high stakes now that we're talking about, is if you look at notions that we've got in the West of truth, if you look at the truth movement, if you look at strict philosophies of truth, I've spoken in the past that a distinction needs to be made between truths and facts. Most people use those words interchangeably. It's a big problem to do so, but most people do. This is one of the problems of language that we've got. And most people don't think philosophically about truth. On that level alone, we can see the philosopher Plato talks about truth, beauty, and goodness, that there's not just truth. Truth has there's a beauty component for a civilization. These are the three classical pillars of civilization: truth, beauty, and goodness. If you just keep emphasizing truth, you are getting very close to propositional statements. 2 + 2 = 4, or whatever it is. You want, yes, the sky is blue, and people nod their heads and go, yes, that's right. And they've all been trained that way, so they're like penguins. Yeah,
correct.
But the point about that, Paul, is that's what people do, not because doing that is wrong, but because doing that is what it's been eroded to. So everything's been eroded. It happened in the church. Everything about faith was reduced to confessions. Go in, read the creed in a formulaic way like a robot. You'll be repeating truth, internalizing truth, expressing truth. Confess with your mouth, believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord. Confess with your mouth that he is Lord, and you shall be saved. So they copy that and they go, there's a prescription. I believe it, yes. Right, confess it with your mouth. Right, okay, just say the creed. You've confessed it. Yeah, but have you? Well, technically you fulfilled it. So you're aligned with truth, a true statement. Underpinned by faith.
Is that not what Cain was doing by just turning up at the altar dumping any old stuff that he had going around because it was just part of what he had to do. Whereas
yeah.
Abel wanted to do that and presented the best. He wanted to be the best. So it's the same attitude. It's the same spirit.
Ultimately, that's the same thing that's been going on for a long time, but you can't correct the problem at the level that the problem presents. So even if you just look at it philosophically, Jesus said as well, not just what Plato said, truth, beauty, and goodness, which is volume. There's 3 facets to that: truth, beauty, and goodness. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Well, a life is fully embodied. A way is a path. When you walk along a path, you see different things. You have diverse experiences on the path that your life is walking, within which you perceive truths. So it isn't a static, narrow thing that can be reduced. Then if you look at the gospel beyond philosophy, love is more important than truth. Not in a sentimental sense. Truth is vitally important, but what type of truth? We've already asked, what does it actually mean? Is it just 2 + 2 = 4? No. So then what is truth? Which is exactly what Pilate said to Jesus. There's an element of that happens on a heart level. So what is love? And I don't mean Hadaway, baby, don't hurt me no more. You know, I'm against the Jim Carrey stuff. But ultimately, there are these subtle questions about truth. But love, now what is love? Can you love somebody in just a sentimental way? Well, I'll tell you something about the culture, high trust and low trust cultures, and narcissism within culture in the West. When people are weighed down, bogged down, and struggling, really struggling, it's very difficult to have enough spare bandwidth to be even remotely curious about other people. If you're not curious about other people, then over time you become self-absorbed because you're under pressure constantly, putting out fires, fighting battles. Your curiosity about other people. In other words, who is this person really? Like, you see the tip of the iceberg, but the iceberg is much more under the surface than that which you see. Now, a person is very much like an iceberg. If you don't engage with them and if you're not curious about them, how can you really be interested in them? And how can you really love them? If you're just seeing them as some extension of your own experience, if you're just seeing them as the visible part of the iceberg. This is why the message of love in the New Testament isn't just a sentimental thing. It's saying, do you actually care about the flesh and blood people walking around, your family, your friends, other people, you know, people further away? Do you actually care about them? What is it to be neighbourly, just putting out your bins for each other? So the problem that we've got in our culture is this: people are so self-absorbed now that they're struggling just to keep their head above water, that they don't have any time to be curious about other people. When you're curious about other people, that's when multiculturalism starts to work. Somebody will go, hey, Alex, I know you're on a show and you were talking about Belgium before and chips and braising steak. And most people might listen to that, go, oh, that's a quaint fact. Let's move on, right? Oh, Alex said something about chips and braising steak. Next. But if someone's actually interested in Belgium, if someone's actually interested in different cultural practices, if anyone's then interested in having braising steak with chips and then maybe traveling to Belgium and going, hey, actually, I quite fancy that. What are other aspects of the culture like? Oh, I'll go and watch a Belgian stand-up or something. Oh, what's stand-up comedy like? A bit different, isn't it? Right? And then you have to start getting invested in those differences in other people that normally you might say, this is too much for me. There's language barriers, there's this barrier, there's that barrier. I'll just stick with my own. In fact, I'll just stick to myself. I've got enough problems. So the problem is we're being overloaded in our culture deliberately. We're being given more and more pressures, the 9 to 5, everything. That's a much bigger obstacle than procuring the awareness you're talking about, because there'll always be those people who want to go down the path you're talking about because they just don't want to pay money at all. Not because there's a principle. You know, I've known people in the past who were part of, like, you know, bone freedom advocates who were just playing the system back and scamming and ripping off and just finding a way to be, you know, a little bit woe, a little bit way, you know. So this is the problem that you've got when you've just got an angle on truth, which becomes pragmatic and self-interested. And that's the real problem we've got in our culture. So everything you're saying, Paul, is right. And if we could make people aware, that would help. And if they would take action, that would help. But it leaves the question unaddressed. Why does anybody do anything in the first place? Why does anyone get out of bed in the morning? Why does anyone care about anyone other than themselves? Is anybody curious or interested anymore in why that person over there, who could just be the tip of an iceberg to me, who I could project all my crap onto, who I could actually ask them a question, get to know them, become curious about them, discover who they are, be genuinely interested in them? It's like we've lost all of that. We've lost all of that because people are treading water trying to survive. Until people get interested enough in other people genuinely to have a revolution of culture and heart, then we'll be urinating in the wind. You can bring about the awareness.
You
Say again,
take
pal.
control of, yeah, I was just going to say, you take control of a language like they have done. You can't say that. You can't use that word. That's the start of free speech going. When all this legislation were from speaking out about a certain religion will get you arrested, while speaking about your religion can get you arrested. There seems to be a targeted thing. Police are being encouraged to do that. We've seen what's happened with the rape gang inquiries, where police deliberately turned and looked the other way. They knew what was going on. Things had been reported. John Wedger's reported it for years, that they would turn up there and girls who were there, 13, 14, would just be told to get off, and they were back on the streets. Well, that just put them back into circulation. So we see that this problem is a perpetuating problem, and it's being pushed and propagated and funded by us working hard and paying bills. So we're working hard in a dysfunctional way within a system that's meant to be working for our benefits, where we employ these people who are obviously the ones who have got any, or at least to look at, have got any kind of influence, are taking backhanders. There's no other way of looking at it. We can see it reflected in our local councils. Roadworks have gone up like mad in the past 6 weeks, Alex, because the new tax year is coming up and they've got to spend, as long as there's a ground broke somewhere, then it's no issues. They're selling green land off and building houses, and they're promoting it as, oh, councils building new houses. When does this stop? Because the prison's here. I mean, I've noticed that the first 5 years after World War II, you've got the CIA, you've got all these agencies that just pop up. Israel pops up. Just so happens the Balfour Declaration, all that passing on. So we see a chronology here of where all this changes or starts to integrate after the war. And we've talked about the entertainment industry and stuff as well. So I've got to, let's see if the tech works. A few more videos to see that we can monitor this. Let me just fill in the gap, mate, while I'm trying to get this sorted.
Yeah, well, I just come back to my point again that we're always looking for political solutions. We see the political ways in which certain operators who we've given the power to will continue to act in their own interests to maintain a system to remain in power. One of the things about the Muslim vote in particular has been, and it was the same with the Democrats in America. It was illegals. It doesn't really matter what the demographic is. It's just whichever demographic suits best. The political powers that be will attempt to hold on to power by rewarding that demographic, kowtowing to that demographic, sucking up to them, and alienating everybody else, because they understand that that's the way that they retain power. Now, as long as people continue to buy into that and have arguments and debates about, well, that's wrong, that shouldn't happen, it's just a fact of life. That is what happens. The only way you can undermine that is to get into the hearts and minds of the people who actually adopt that philosophy. Because what that is effectively is all the people who, say some Muslims in Gorton and Denton in this whole accusation. that they swapped to the Greens to keep reform out. Well, if that's what happened, we always look at the politician and blame the politicians for what they did for the chicanery. But every single one of those Muslims, if they did that, right, would have been taking a bribe. In reality, it's a bribe. Now, if you have a religion, whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, or whoever you are, usually there's a strong moral and ethical code, and your God would not be particularly happy if you took a bribe. Now, if there's a higher principle, so let's say you can bring about jihad, or you're applying different standards to your own culture and your own kind to everybody else, then you can justify anything. But effectively, the reality is, even if you try and justify it, you are taking a bribe. You're saying, well, if I vote for this person, regardless of every other thing about their policies that may not be suitable to me, I'll get what I want. And therefore, I'm prepared to bend the rules, agree covertly with this agenda, and align with it to retain, so that they retain power and so that I get the favours. So what you're doing, everyone who does that is saying, I'm bribable, I'm corruptible. And of course, Satan tried everything to corrupt Jesus Christ, and it's a good job he was the only perfectly sinless human being, or he'd have got corrupted, and Satan tried with power and glory of the world. So that tells us that virtually
I've got to say, Alex, the majority of people who get promoted will do that. They are not bribable as in monetary all the time, but if there's things in it for them, they'll do that every time. And because they'll do that, they become yes men. So that means the upper management, like the senior management, and then what you've got there is you've got a void because you've got an in-between management. I'm speaking particularly from my experience, that has got to take the crap from below and from above and try and process it and keep, frontline staff happy. And there's very few managers in the prison service that can do that these days. I do remember one manager in particular who was given a manual that thick for the new, and I can't tell you how many new policies there were over COVID, because I'm not kidding, it changed on the hour at one point. Stuff that we did in the morning, we weren't doing in the afternoon. And this manager held this book up and said, this is the new policy that we're starting this week. And you heard every staff member go, oh. And he threw it across the office, hit the wall and landed in the bin. He says, keep doing what you're doing, it works. So anybody says anything, send them to me. That's a manager. But when you've got managers that just want to look good, like have a cat's milk bowl with the name on it and outside the governor's office type, that was the sycophantic attitude that I saw that was taking over management. And it was coming from government down to regional, down to individual establishments. And anybody who got promoted, it didn't matter if you was good at your job. It didn't matter if you'd not even got dust on your boots. You could get promoted. And that's what's undone the prison service. That's why, that I laugh about these advertisements for the prison service. Well, which officer's gone to jail this week? You've seen it with the police as well. Something's not right there, because it wasn't like that 40 years ago.
Well, I don't know.
I've said about the story where, as a 10-year-old kid, I'm playing Dirty Harry Callahan in Irvine Street, firing a 357 Magnum blank firing replica, where a copper says, can I have a look at that, young man? That's a nice gun. Where'd you live? Walks into the shop. My mum sees this cop and says, what's he done? He says, oh, nothing. There's no problem, Mrs. Webster, but I don't think he should be playing in the street with that, and puts a 357 Magnum on my mum's shop counter. And my mum says, I didn't know he had that. Get in. You put that forward to this week. You've got stabbings, you've got shootings going on everywhere. That 10-year-old kid, me, is having guns drawn on him now. That's how much society's changed, because the trust has gone. The trust has gone from society.
Of course it has, Paul, but the thing about it is, this is why truth isn't just fact. So this is my point. No matter what side, truth has got to be, call it the moral, faith, spiritual conviction, where a person draws a line in the sand and says, I won't cross that line. The problem is there are too many people, even in the truth movement, who will talk about truth because it's a version of truth that will get them the result that they want to be able to continue the life that they always lived before they found out there was a problem. So people only start to get bothered when this is affecting me. And so, and even if they're aligned with the truth proper, why are they aligned with the truth proper? Because if they got that corrected, they could go back to sleep and carry on living the way they always did. So even that's not a virtue. Even if you align with truth with dodgy motive, it's not good enough. Truth has got more than a factual foundation. It's too easy to parade facts and know that you're on the side of right. It's where do you draw a line in the sand? A person who has real conviction and integrity will not be compromised, will not take a bribe, because they understand that there's much more at stake. If you give in, then you are part of the problem. And there aren't enough people who are prepared to stand and resist on that basis. That's why we have the problems, not just because of politicians. People are corruptible. And no matter what they say about truth, most of them are complaining because it's affecting them adversely, not because they really believe in the integrity of truth, because most people don't hold to it anyway.
Corruption and apathy creates a dangerous playground.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to begin by just saying we're doing extremely well in Iran. The difference between them and us is they had a navy 2 weeks ago, they have no navy anymore. It's all at the bottom of the sea. 58 ships knocked down in 2 days. And we have the greatest navy anywhere in the world. It's not even close. So we are doing really well. We're not going to let them have nuclear weapons. Because if they had them, they'd use them, and we're not going to let that happen. But they said yesterday that we weren't negotiating with them, and now they admit that we were negotiating with them. So they want to make a deal. The reason they want to make a deal is they have been just beat to shit.
So the are you thinking of taking control of Iran?
They've just been beat the shit, mate.
Yeah, I don't know why he's going down the path that it doesn't seem sensible to. You'd think he would be doing what he's doing, and just, I suppose, being a bit more diplomatic about it. He's got the power. He's doing what he wants to do. So just be very diplomatic. But it's like he's doubling down in his speech, which seems a bit odd to me, because it's going to invite more and more criticism.
There is reports that, there's propaganda on both sides going on here. That America, the US and Israel aren't having it all their own way type thing. But we don't know what the truth is. It is the wag the dog. It's the information that we get. And there's a lot of information that's contrasting. The turnaround against Trump, is this all part of the plan? The Ologist hasn't turned up as yet, but is this all part of the plan? Because you're looking at quite large crowds in these No Kings protests. When you see No Kings protests popping up in every state like it's organized, Alex, you can see the pattern, because the people who actually know the truth about things, you can't get organized because you'll get shut down. So when you see all this, they'll be waving the same signs like they did in Lee for the pro-immigrant stuff. It's the same slogans, it's the same signs. So now we're seeing Trump acting like that. I've never seen a president act like this, boasting and I've got the best thing in. He's putting his face on everything. Will he be going on the money next? He's already on a coin as Cyrus the Great for Israel. We see these biblical connotations being rung clearly like bells everywhere. So there's a belief that's coming from that side of the fence that is very scriptural, and they're trying to form something. You know, this clash with Islam and Judaism and Christianity. It's Christianity that's being pushed to one side. It's like two people pretending that they argue with each other. You know, I was speaking to a Muslim friend this week who said the Muslim Brotherhood's known to be corrupted. Well, these are like good people who are following the religion. They're not the ones who want to create unholy jihad, as in going and killing people and throwing people off buildings because of their sexual desires. There's something that's, I don't know how to put it, Alex. It's like unorganized, organized chaos.
It is. Yeah, it is for sure. And we've talked about several times, I suppose, how it's important for people to keep their head. There's a lot going on. I mean, ultimately, what you were talking about here in terms of the UK and challenging the court system and the jurisdictional aspect of it, and yet still we've got this issue now with fuel prices and probably freezing of maybe rationing. So people are seeing all these things going on in the world. They're still trying to pay for food, because obviously once petrol and diesel just go crazy, then the price of food is going to start going up, and so it's putting a clamp on people, and their attention is going to be scattered. So as I think I've mentioned, I've not mentioned it for a while, because of the increase in lawlessness, the love of most people will grow cold. Jesus said, ultimately, you can't give attention, like I was saying about the iceberg principle. We can't really take a lot of interest in other people and lead a full life when we're thinking about the next time there's going to be food in our stomach, or for a lot of people, and we're going to go on holiday this year, or whatever it is. It'll stress them out, and they'll focus on that, and they'll become self-absorbed, and they'll worry. And as long as anything's going on that's getting people to be in their head rather than looking outward, celebrating life, living life, taking an interest in other people, you're going to have impoverished notions of truth as fact, and people advocate for things that are just self-interest rather than having the bandwidth to really love other people, be curious about other people. Because once you've got that, you can build communities that are meaningful. Because when communities are meaningful, people start to share values that are actually human. At the moment, we've got a bunch of different camps arguing about facts, and that's never going to change anything.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, well, I think it's highly unlikely that he didn't know. It's highly unlikely. I don't have the facts, but we do know that Epstein's accountant, testified that the Epstein estate settled with Jane Doe number 4, a very important Jane Doe. Jane Doe number 4's files were hidden until Trump bombed Iran and changed the subject. Jane Doe's number 4 files were only found missing because of the Maxwell discovery. And people noticed that Bates stamps, numbers that lawyers use to identify documents, were missing. So we get, finally, right after bombing Iran, we get the Jane Doe number 4 files. Now, lying to the FBI is a crime. Martha Stewart went to jail for it. All people interviewed by the FBI are told that. Jane Doe number 4 alleged to the FBI that Epstein abused her when she was 13 and that Trump abused her when she was 15. Epstein's accountant, testified that the Epstein estate settled with Jane Doe number 4 for both Epstein and Trump. His lawyer tried to walk that back. Indike refused to confirm or deny that. Now, how do we get to the bottom of that? Congress passes a law invalidating all NDAs from the Trump organization, from Epstein, any of his entities, from the estate, or based on any activities at the Epstein properties. Let's have the truth. We want the truth, no NDAs.
You can't handle the truth, Alex.
Yeah, well, I think that all this stuff now, it would be interesting if Taylor came on, because he's, we can't, this woman, I don't know her from Adam. Now, she might be right. But if a lot of this stuff with the war has been used to cover up some stuff where Trump's implicated, this whole idea that Trump then was going to, first of all, be pro-Epstein files, then try and block them to get people feverishly and rabidly thinking that he had something to hide, only then for him to come out and expose other people and not Trump, and that therefore Trump had created the conditions for the people to be frothing at the mouth, the liberal leftists to be demanding that he be released, him create resistance so they demand even more. Then in the end he acquiesces and it all comes out. That doesn't look like the way it's going. It does look from that sort of commentary that in fact they are using this war to bury a lot of news because there was an issue. So of course it's getting harder and harder, I think, on that level for an American correspondent to maintain his narrative. His own narrative is going to come under a bit of pressure. Yeah, there's a lot of acting going on. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's decoying us. But at the end of the day, what is the backstory? And the key backstory is that this is all part of the game. The white hats are in control. It's all part of a ruse, and we all need to, get our popcorn, fasten our seatbelts, and just wait for the arrests.
Well, we've got to ask, how are we deciding the validity of these claims? Because, like you say, allegedly, if that's correct, that Epstein's accountants testified to the FBI that Epstein's accountants settled for both him and Trump with that victim. You've got MI5 wanting all the Epstein files released to them to prosecute Prince Andrew. How's this plan working then? Because both look, shall we say, not innocent, but we are watching a play. This, is this a really whodunit part? We've already had the main witness against Andrew mysteriously die after saying, "I'm not going to kill myself." She was reported to have cuts and bruises, and then she's dead. There's strange things like, it's like, what solicitors do if you put a DSAR in for them. They'll give you so much information that you won't be able to, they're hoping you won't find what you're looking for. You've seen it many a time, haven't you, where they flood you with information because they don't want you to know what they're doing. So you see all this going on, but if you're prosecuting one, so there's validity for one, how is there not validity in it for the other? It doesn't look good, does it? And then you see all this bombosity about doing this with this country and taking Cuba and now more or less threatening to leave NATO and UK, we've helped you out loads of times. Hang on a minute, you now shout at us because we didn't help you and you've helped us loads of times, but didn't we help you as well? And didn't we help Israel? Because without us, you wouldn't have had that. It's all very strange, because then you go back to the 1933 transfer agreement with, that Austrian painter that was a wonderful person at one point and turned out to be the devil incarnate. But the transfer agreement was to transfer all wealth for the Jews into the Deutsche Bank, get them over to Israel, into Palestine, and then they'll sell all the German goods that they need to build the cities and whatnot. All that agreement was done before Jews declared war on Germany. So once we start to see these patterns all coming together, Alex, with this education system, with the shock and awe stuff, whilst keeping people arguing over football and things like that, you see how fractured society really is. And what was holding it together, which was those communities, have now gone. Families have gone, communities have gone, and it's a purpose-driven thing. And when you see it done by policy for migration replacement, there's no other way to look at it, because it was always dealt with before easily, but now this is being promoted. That is the definition of genocide, when you forcibly change a country's culture by policy and enforcement. And it's all been done against its own population through their own consent, because of what they've been brought up into. You'll own nothing and be happy, Alex. Well, we've never owned anything while we thought we did. So nothing's going to change.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that in the past, I've mentioned this, it's worth mentioning it again. It's like the holodeck and it's reality testing. And the problem is, it's like everyone, you know, when they did COVID and they said, you all got to go in your bubbles. Well, that's actually their wet dream, because effectively what's happened is people are not in bubbles, they're in goldfish bowls. And it's like everyone's in their own goldfish bowl with a family, maybe, you know, slight extended family and some friends. And they consider that they're swimming around in this bowl. And then they're looking out through this bowl, a distorted picture of other fish in other goldfish bowls. And as long as we're not all swimming openly in the sea, we're all in our little ghettos and silos. And then they can just do what they want. And we can't reality test because we can't get past the glass. You know, we can see through, we can see something, right? But the glass is a barrier and we can't penetrate it. So we're all in a sort of a transparent prison, swimming around, maybe with a certain degree of lucidity, you know, so that we can seem to see certain things. But in reality, we can't realistically engage with them. We can't get contact with them. That's why in the political process, people like Zach Polanski and that woman, whatever her name is, for Gorton and Denton, where they can get up, yeah, they can get up on that stage and talk about trans, LGBTQ plus, while singing Inshallah Allah, and just sort of creating this mishmash that everybody else who doesn't buy into this narrative is far right extremist. And then they can have a party atmosphere, and you have like loads of people there, loads of people lapping it up and believing that there is something called the far right, that it's like that doesn't exist. And yet they're all insisting that it does, and they're fighting against this thing that doesn't exist. In reality, you've just got a bunch of people saying, have you seen what's going on with this policy? So anything where you describe reality and want to do something about it is now extremist. So ultimately, just stay in your goldfish bowl, look out through your glass, and as long as you do that safely, we're not going to have to send anyone to your front door to haul you in. And then you can watch this show, and as long as you can't do anything about it and do any reality testing, that's perfectly okay. Any fish that tries to jump out of the bowl and get into the wider ocean is radically isolated for a start, and is going to get polished off by a shark. And they're not going to allow anyone to break all those goldfish bowls, so that, you know, in those archetypal scenes, smash the goldfish tank and suddenly you've released the fish. So yeah, this is the problem that we're dealing with, Paul. We can't really reality test, and that means that everything's a show and everything's just a speculation. So to change things, like you were saying, it's going to take individuals to correctly diagnose what the problems are and begin to take certain individual actions, but they're not going to get support.
At least to start a conversation about it, instead of moaning about it. A conversation is to understand how it's happened, because when you have an understanding, it gives you something. You know, when I understood what was going on and they shouldn't be doing, and as far as I could see, they couldn't do it. But then to see what they did, using armed police, everything was at their disposal, and they were charging me for the pleasure of doing it. It's a surreal thing. It's a moment where, you know, it's like one of the Marvel films where he gets knocked out of his body. His spirit's like flown out of his body. He's been hit that hard, and it's like, is this really happening? Everything's slowed down. Do you know what? For months, and it's the same that it comes along. So it's interesting you said that it's like a show, because let's go back here to 2008. Now, is this who we think it is, or is it not? Because I think she might still be alive, but Taylor would have to tell us about that.
Yeah.
The Iranians to know that if I'm the president, we will attack Iran. Whatever stage of development they might be in their nuclear weapons program in the next 10 years, during which they might foolishly consider launching an attack on Israel, we would be able to totally obliterate them. That's a terrible thing to say, but those people who run Iran need to understand that, because that perhaps will deter them from doing something that would be reckless, foolish, and tragic.
Good job she's not threatening them, innit?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's 2000. That's 2008. Is it Trump who, oh no, he isn't, hates Hillary and said he was going to put her in jail, but we still see Hillary, but that's not Hillary. It's all getting very complicated, and when it's just, well, you just got to trust in it. There doesn't seem like there's much to trust in. Is that fair?
Yeah, there isn't. You can't trust it. That's the point. The issue for everybody is that they're disenfranchised. Again, they can't reality test. They've got to form judgments as spectators. Well, on what basis? If you can't touch base, if you're not somebody who's got access to the corridors of power, you're requiring some sort of journalistic voice, some researcher who goes in, excavates the facts, is reliable, and you can trust them. I mean, that's a lot of links in the chain. So when you look at how difficult it was, when people talk about, fake news, you remember when it first came, fake news, how would anyone verify any piece of information, particularly now with deep fakes? There's so many links in the chain. There's so many videos now coming on, and they're not just politically, but just nature videos of animals eating each other, lions attacking this. So I watched one earlier, some woman so-called jumping a high jump off a cliff she'd have died on impact. But at first, when you saw it, it was very good AI. If you didn't understand physics and you didn't understand the nature of the reality, you might not.
They've done one even better, because you just presume that it's AI all the time now.
Yeah.
So it's
exactly.
very easy for people to deflect it with, well, that's AI. Well, hang on a minute, though. It might have a point to it. Let's talk about it. It becomes that conspiracy theorist flippant remark to get rid of things. But there's there's some information here that seems to link these patterns that we've seen. When we look back, we see the patterns at the very least. And it's also an interesting educational platform.
This timing is wild. Larry Silverstein just bought LA's tallest tower as terror warnings resurface.
Yeah, freaking wild, Stewie. Silverstein Properties reportedly bought the U.S. Bank Tower for around $430 million, which is the tallest building in Los Angeles.
Why are people connecting this to terrorism?
Because the fat man remembers 9/11 talks, Stewie. Larry Silverstein leased the asbestos-filled Twin Towers weeks before 2001 and later received roughly $4.6 billion because he insured it for terrorism before the attacks.
That makes people uneasy.
Totally, but here's the thing, Stewie. Right now, the FBI and DHS have issued general warnings about possible drone threats on the West Coast, not confirmed plots, especially with tensions involving Iran.
Would Iran even want to strike here?
Probably not, Stewie. Polls in 2024 showed under 35% U.S. approval for a wider war, and attacking American soil would instantly boost support for retaliation.
So what's the smarter move?
Economics, baby. Iran's conventional forces are degraded, but the Strait of Hormuz handles about 20% of global oil. Disrupting shipping there spikes prices worldwide. pressures Western voters and forces governments to explain inflation without firing a missile at Los Angeles.
Then why do people fear false flags?
History fuels that fear, Stewie. Declassified plans like Operation Northwoods, the USS Liberty attack, the Lavon affair, and more prove governments have considered staged attacks, which makes people question narratives during chaotic wars.
Great, Father. Nothing calms babies like declassified conspiracies.
And they've already been doing it in this war as well. The Israelis are the #1 suspect for the drone attack on the British base in Cyprus, which seems to be an attempt to drag Britain into this war. There have also been reports of Mossad agents bombing civilian and infrastructure targets across the Allied Gulf states, like at the Dubai airport or at the Aramco oil refinery. These Gulf states have been arresting suspected Mossad agents as a result and have allegedly prevented further attacks.
So it's less about explosions and more about confusion, money, and steering public anger the right way.
Here's the real kicker, Stewie. In modern wars, the loudest explosions aren't bombs, they're economic shocks. And the scariest weapon is confusion that makes citizens fight each other instead of asking who benefits.
Are you noticing yet?
Sounds like petrol prices going up, mate.
Well,
have
that's
you got toilet? Let's keep toilet rolling.
I was checking the other day, actually. Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. But yeah, I mean, obviously, that's a really good presentation because that's exactly what the crack is. And they have multiple payoffs from this kind of thing. You know, it's always portrayed at one level, but decoying is always the same. Decoying says, hey, look over there. And it's just distracting your attention to the thing that they don't want you to be looking at while they're sneaking something else in. And you can blame it on the thing. It's just optics. And of course, we've known that for a long time, but it's very difficult for us, you know, to work out exactly what the agenda is. But that was a really good piece. And I do think that it is largely economic to create inflation, and how far they're taking it on this occasion, who knows? I calculated that probably if they could keep this artificial thing going for about 6 months, they could probably buy the extra inflation that they add just to the fuel. Before you even consider the logistics chains and food going up, just on the fuel itself, they could probably create a net profit. They could take $1 trillion off the people within 6 months. So
barrels of oil went down, Alex, this week. Barrels of oil went down while our petrol prices went up, and people go, "Oh, it's because of the markets and But this is inflation, right? So inflation is when they make things up.
Yeah,
they just make it up, you know.
Yeah.
And most of us, and I include myself, don't understand what that is, because it's a calculation that they make on an economic program that they've applied that is beneficial to them and excludes us at all costs.
Yeah.
How does it do that? Well, we do it ourselves. That's the best slave to have, the one who will clothe themselves and feed themselves and then pay for everything as well.
Yeah,
I mean, because they believe that they've got the right to be in this position where we serve. It's just not politically correct to say that, although I see that aspect changing again now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just money either. As soon as you get into tangibles like fuel, they know how many litres of fuel would normally sell at the normal market price. In other words, every given week, before there's a sharp incline through these circumstances, this is how much would sell. It'd be pretty stable. It might vary seasonally, but it'd be pretty stable across the world. So they know if they pulled a number and really hike the prices up fast, they would see just how much people spent less on fuel. In other words, they could work out the very simple mathematics ones, because they've got all the data. How strong a deterrent is it? In other words, how many people will carry on just paying more money and traveling the same amount? And how many will just stop using the cars because, of course, they want people to stop using the cars. So once they get a metric on that, they can see that if we do this at this level here and control that, this is what these lot will do en masse. Which means, yes, it could be extra money. How resilient are they? They'll keep paying. They'll have less money in the pocket, or no, they'll retain money in the pocket and they'll travel less. And with 15-minute cities and everything else that they want to do, they'll be looking at all those metrics, so that what they're doing is they're creating a cause and effect experiment at all points to see how pliable everyone is, and how by simple targeted manoeuvres that put a stranglehold on the whole world economy, they can get the results they want. If people start saying, I'm saving money, I'm not using my car, they'll see that actually there's so much less usage of cars. Even to the mile, they can work it out.
Let's be honest, right? The Straits of Hormuz, we don't know whether it's open or it's closed or it's anything. Loads of beavers could have built a big dam and stopped it. They could tell us that. We don't actually know. But when they say it over and over again, and then they point at each other and say it's their fault, so we're going to do this and we're going to do that. By the way, we've found 800 billion to send overseas for this, but no, you can't have that. You know, we can't sort our own problems out. Where are you finding all this? Well, they're just printing it, Alex, to collapse the economy. Once they collapse the economy and they have to redigitize it, all these remedies that we've got now, all the game changes. What do they do then? Because they're saying there's no fuel coming. We don't do our own. You know, have we got the skills to start up again here in this country?
Well, we did, Paul, but obviously Parliament's just knocked it back again. So the MPs, these traitors have all stopped us being self-sufficient, and it's all we know. It's Milliback. They're all connected. It's all part of the ruse that's being done.
I saw an article earlier today, and I think it was 1968 in Boughton, and it was the first supermarket. And there was hundreds of people queuing, picking the baskets up. Obviously, they were all ladies picking baskets up and getting ready for shopping. If only they knew what that was the beginning of.
Yeah,
that was the beginning of everything changing. You know, I come along in Lee 4 years later, and I'm like, that my generation was the one that saw that prosperity starting to be the cuts, and then they blame everybody else. You know, Maggie Thatcher, the milk snatcher, but Maggie Thatcher's saying what's happening now would not have happened under her watch. Would she not have just done as she was told? Because when she was no longer necessary, she was gone. You know, then when she's asked what her greatest achievement was in office, and the words was New Labour, which was Tony Blair, who's a war criminal. So her greatest achievement is a war criminal government. And you're thinking, who's writing this? Me mum never told me about this. My mum said Labour was the working man's party. Doesn't sound like it, Mum.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're voting for Labour because your mum did or your dad did.
Wait, why did fascism even exist in the first place after World War I?
All right, Stewie, simple version. After World War I, Europe was broke, angry, and scared. Liberal democracies looked weak, economies crashed, and the 1917 Russian Revolution made people fear communism spreading everywhere.
So fascism was basically a reaction?
Yeah, fascism and communism both rejected liberal democracy. They favored strong leaders. The big difference was goals. Communism pushed class struggle, ending private property, and doing away with the old moral structure. Fascism pushed nationalism, tradition, and unity.
That explains the tension.
Communism came from Marxism. Karl Marx said history moves through class conflict. Lenin and Trotsky believed the 1917 Bolshevik takeover should trigger global revolution, what Trotsky called permanent revolution, not just change inside Russia.
And Europe panicked because of that?
Totally. In 1919, communist uprisings hit Germany and Hungary. In Germany, the Jews Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg led the Spartacists, but right-wing Freikorps crushed them. In Hungary, the communist Jew Bela Kun ruled briefly before being overthrown by Admiral Miklos Horthy with Romanian support.
Italy next.
Yep, Italy saw strikes, land seizures, and political violence. Benito Mussolini organized black shirts to fight leftists. By 1922, he marched on Rome and took power. Fascism presented itself as order, tradition, and an anti-communist shield, while allowing private ownership under state control.
Wild thing is, even establishment figures nodded along, like Churchill seeing Mussolini as a cure for Bolshevik chaos. Right. In 1927, Churchill literally praised Mussolini as an antidote to Bolshevism, though he ended up opposing him and siding with the Bolsheviks in World War II. Did other countries copy that?
Some tried. Oswald Mosley's British fascists never gained enough traction. In 1936, Bolsheviks, including Red Army officer Leba Lazarevich Feldman, attempted to seize Spain, sparking a civil war marked by the destruction of over 20,000 churches and the killing of thousands of clergy and religious figures. Franco's nationalists won with foreign backing from Portugal's Salazar, Italy's Mussolini, and Germany's Hitler.
Right. It sounds like competing ideologies colliding under pressure, not as simply as your history books make it out to be.
Exactly. Fascism and communism weren't born in a vacuum. After 1917, fascism rose as a reaction to communism, not its twin, and that collision shaped the road to World War II.
Are you noticing yet? Follow.
So when you look at it like that, you see the war wasn't what my mum told me it was. It was her experience of it, and it was her trust in government. We've just seen there, Mr. Churchill flip-flopped quite a bit when his moneylenders say, you do this now. And he's rated as this hero type thing. But when we look behind the curtain, there's no heroes there, Alex. They're just all actors. They're all actors, and we're the ones watching the play on the cave wall. We're not watching what's really going on. We've left the shop unattended. We've given the keys over. We've signed a piece of paper that says, we're just going to walk away and ignore it because I'll come back when I'm ready and I'll sign for it. So until I go and sign and I'm taken off this presumption, then I'm always going to be part of this system. And I've got to be that good citizen that follows the rules, doesn't disobey. Take your pill, have your jab. If you don't have your jab, my jab doesn't work. When did that happen? When did we have people swimming in masks? When did we have partitions on outside pub tables? When would that be okay in any form? How did people go along with that? To the point where you're working in a prison where you can wear the mask under your chin as long as you wear it. And that was policy. That was just mind-blowing, mate, to see how people changed. People are known for 30 years throwing themselves into bushes because people walked too close to them because they thought they were going to die. And that psychological attack, that trauma, changed society. What did they do while everybody locked themselves up? They put an infrastructure in. And what's that infrastructure going to be? That's going to be the prison that you don't see, that you're just going to have to accept because everything's gone. People will want to go back. Can we go back to how it used to be? That type of thing. There's no going back here. I had 2 generations of information, and the information that they got was from experience, but their information was limited as well. But their experiences don't coincide with what now the so-called history is telling me, and how they were groomed into it, and how parents groom children, and then it's the children that the state gets hold of. And how did they do this with all these kids? It's property. We've registered the property, but we've walked away from the equity of that property title. We've left it in people's hands to look after them. So we've left our kids at the creche. We've left them at daycare. We leave them at school. It's bonkers when you understand it as a system of management. And when that system of management for a community with under Christian values, and I put the Christian term in brackets, under God's law, that community, that can't go wrong. But when you put it as a business plan and you take the land away and you're dragged into the sea, man can tag all kinds of it on. You could actually say to your employer, possibly at some point, maybe even now, that between 2 and 3 on Thursday afternoon, I have to have an hour in the afternoon off work, and it must be paid. Why? Because I identify as a coffee table for an hour. Now, you'd think that would never be plausible, would it not? I know in the prison service where somebody identified as a toddler, and if required, prison staff were encouraged to hold their hand on the way to the servery if they felt intimidated or whatever. Now, when I started in the prison service, there was a fella who identified as a cat and had made himself a nice little costume out of sewing this thing up. When he identified as a cat, you didn't encourage it. In fact, you'd be disciplined for encouraging it. So in 15 years, I saw a complete change once the business plan come in. And as I said, if you rehabilitate prisoners, that means the prison service would lose customers. The police service would lose customers. That's not a good business plan, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, they've obviously got annual budgets and targets. And once you get year-on-year budgeting, you don't get long-term planning. It's all about, well, if somebody puts the tender in for this and somebody else puts the tender in that's more competitive, right, well, we can work with that. And everyone's dealing with a form of short-termism where that's about expediency. It's about making a sales pitch. And a lot of those pitches are not just about the economic bottom line. It's like with planning permission. If somebody calls a property an eco property, oh, right, it's an eco property. Oh, well, we've got to get behind that. And so they'll just, even if it's not an eco property at all, even if it devalues good planning, good town and country planning, good sort of building regs and land management, it doesn't matter, because if it's environmental, it's an eco home. Oh, fantastic. So it's an access all area pass. So people know how to maximize funding bids. Yeah, I've seen it so many times when people put funding bids in. It's just slick. Oh, look, there's a pot of money, it's 15 grand. Lloyd's Bank are doing this thing where you could get up to 15, maybe 20 grand. You could get another member of staff. You could open your day centre for another day. Get one member of staff, and then we'll get a few extra quid for this. And we'll, right, okay, put a bid in. Who's the best with the best flowery poetic language? Get them to write a bid. Talk crap, and then it'll sound better than somebody else's bid. And this is a problem. This is a problem. It's all cosmetic. There's very little monitoring or follow up. It's just cosmetic. And those who are the best at creating, the best image or come out with the most flowery rhetoric, they're often winning these bids. So while we're living in a world like that where there's no proper measurement and accountability, it is going to go the way it is. I mean, I talk a lot about Polanski and so on, the Greens. I mean, this just so obviously, it's insanity.
You're down on the Greens, mate. You're definitely down on the Greens.
It's such insanity. And it's so transparent.
It's insanity. It's insanity, mate.
And it's been set up to mobilise against reform. And it doesn't matter about the merits of reform. It's just the citizens saying, yeah, we're not having these in. So even though we don't want the Greens, we know Polanski's a fruitcake, and we'll get them talking about anti-billionaire rhetoric. Well, we don't really want that. But what we'll do, if we get a load of working class people who haven't got two brain cells to rub together to vote for the Greens, they probably won't get in anywhere. If they do, we can subdue them. And that'll take votes away from Farage. And that means we won't have any challenges at the ideological level. I mean, they'll nobble him as well. But ultimately, it's all about cosmetics. It's all about giving an impression, giving an appearance, and playing the fiddle to stupid people. And all
can you in history ever remember a genuine change that didn't cost blood?
No.
Because anything that's presented, mate, you see all the same faces that were promoting vaccines and everything on one side, and they've now come over to a side that was against them, and they're over on that side now. Oh yeah, but I believe this now. This is ridiculous. It's so visibly is transparent, and it makes you sick to see that people still have fallen for it. Now, you have some politicians who have actually come out and said, look, I genuinely believe this. It fooled me. I've known doctors who've done the same, even had their own jabs and promoted them, and then saw all the statistics and after feeling ill themselves. You know, I've lost family members, people who may have not scoffed, but certainly disregarded because they wanted to go on holiday. Suddenly everything become real. And I think that's what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years. And what you touched on early on in the show was when it's not affecting people. Can you hear him? I can hear Martin Niemöller again, just echoing from the past. It's only when it comes to your door, because that's when it affects your reality. That's when the observer can't look over there. Here it is. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. No, it's not. This is, you know, this is a puppet show that we're watching. But, you know, it's like when you see all the latest films that come out, they're all the same regenerated crap, all the same kind of stuff that we've, you know, it's like they don't even try. It's all digitized now. So it's not even filmmaking. You know, you go back to like films like Smoking the Bandit and Hooper, where they did all these stunts and they actually did these things. The films actually look realistic. Now you know that somebody jumping off a cliff and landing in a Marvel superhero position is not real. But the kids don't know that. And I certainly wouldn't have known that when I was a kid. So you see that generations have changed, because now all those characters, same with Star Wars, they're all gay, or they're all trans, or they're all this ideology. There's no main religion because we all come from one source. So that covers, you know, that covers the majority of what you'd call religions, including all these gods and everything. So you then throw out a few religions that say, no, there's only one God. And then those few religions disagree on everything. Yet 2 of those so-called religions follow the same scriptures, but they disagree. But then there's another faction who's wrote some other stuff of their own. So you need to just get to the truth. We spoke about it earlier, that you're talking about the icebergs. It's not what all the icebergs could look beautiful. Look how sculptural, look how cold, how fresh it looks. Look at all those jagged bastards underneath that are popping all the rivets. You know, you don't know that iceberg. You don't know this reality. You don't know what it's Vanity Fair, Alex. Look at the lights. Oh, it's great. And the bulbs are popping, and people still can't see it because, you know, people will be getting married, people will be moving house, people will be booking that holiday. I know people who books holidays, and, you know, it's like nothing, it's always going to keep happening. So you just take it every day, don't you? Because I've never seen it like this in my lifetime. It's always been stability. There's nothing stable in any country, according to the information that we can all find out. Even the mainstream have got to touch on there's some abnormalities about things. You know, I mean, the royals were sacred at one time. Now it seems that even Auntie B wants to throw them under the bus. So times are changing, mate.
You said before, actually, and it was a good point. I don't think you're planning it, but you said, has there ever been a time in history where it's not required, in your experience, blood to bring about genuine change? Well, we know the blood that brought about the only genuine change. And so when you said it, you were talking about revolutions, which has always been the case. To get real change, there's usually been this violent bloodshed that's brought about regime change in the proper sense, not the type of rubbish we hear about all the time on the news. So there is a shedding of blood, and often it's innocent civilian blood and stuff. But actually, there was another innocent one who was perfectly innocent, whose blood was shed to once and for all deal with all of this. And that is the blood that was shed. That is the final full stop at the end of the sentence, at the end of history. And that's where it's all headed, Paul, for sure.
Yeah. when the all those sacrifices, all them oblations that was done in Old Testament under all those laws, that you had to follow all these laws. Why? Because you have to show that this is what you want to do. And because you don't feel it, you can't discern it because you haven't got that heart of flesh. I think you might have you written a book, haven't you?
Yeah.
So it's that heart of flesh that was given to us from that innocent blood, because if animal sacrifice being scattered by those people was good enough, then we wouldn't have needed a saviour. But the ones who don't know that they need a saviour are the ones that need the saviour. But those people have been deceived. Their traumas, their life, not knowing who they are, not knowing what's going on in the world, then all those feelings of lust and greed that we're all got this propensity to have to deal with. The factor is that now we can discern that. But if you knew the truth, and to know it wasn't enough for me, because it was about believing. How do you believe? Well, like I said, when it comes down to those Judaism, following the Torah and things like that, compared to what you call Christians, you'd say the Gospel, New Testament, without them both, you're missing something. You've got to put these two things together. But one says they only need one, and then you've got another side that says we only need one. But that's not the truth. So while you're arguing about that and you're thinking you're doing all the rituals the right way, that is what Cain was doing. I'll just do that. That's all he wants. That's all he's interested in. No, I want you to love me. I want you to be in your life and stuff like that. We don't know how to feel that because of that disconnect. Our hearts have got the law written. That's why I forget which scripture it is, but when it's the scripture says that the Gentiles have the laws written in their hearts, and even though they don't, not verbatim here, but even though they don't know me, they do my law, which is a law unto its own. So they're still doing the right thing, but they don't know them. And then the scripture says, and they can't know me unless I call them to my son. So the ones who are called have to tell these people, and it's the ones who will hear that truth. So you see how the pattern is got to go backwards, because it's being reversed from that first lie that was ever told. You had a society of people who didn't know any better. They were going to learn. They were corrupted. And then everybody became corrupt to the point where everybody works hard and pays the bills. Yeah, but you're not supposed to do that. Everybody does it. So everybody's got to that point. So they've got to, that has got to go into reverse at some point. And that we're following the scriptures. So let's say the Bible. We're following the Bible, what the Bible says. Whatever religion claims to be Christian seems to have issues with what the Bible says. They don't follow it. They don't follow those holidays because they're for the Jews. They're not for them. That's not what the scriptures say. So if this is the truth, the way, the life, it's like, Bill Hicks famously said, I think what God meant to say was, I've never been that confident. If that's God's word, and everybody says it, everybody says that Jesus is a good bloke, he's this, he's that. Not they all say that he's God, but that book says that he's God. That's when it annoys is when people say, where does he say that? Well, he says it without saying the words, I am God. It's like the Bible is not in the Bible, but it's still what we call the Bible. So why people want to play semantics like that when there's a possibility that your entire eternity depends upon it? Now, if you don't believe that, it doesn't matter if it's true. It still doesn't matter. But if that is true and there's a possibility, would you not want to check that out? Because that to me doesn't make any logical sense. When you're lost, when you're caught up in all that fog and mist because you've been groomed into this world, but when you start to see a pattern, you can't go back. It's like those patterns that say, you know, in this pattern, find the cat, and you might spend ages to find it, but once you've seen it, you'll never unsee it. It'll always be there. So it's like when it's disclosed, that's when your reality changes. And if somebody's programming you to accept that kind of disclosure, and your earliest inputs, your 0 to 5, then you've got a society of whatever you want it to be. We're just fortunate that the Word of God was preserved, and there's a lot of people that's brought it to this point. And, you know, we do this to try and join what's going on in the world because we see it. We've experienced a lot of it through the system. So we see what this Babylon system is. We've heard it sung about for decades. Bob Marley mentioned it once or twice. It's what he's singing about. Well, everything on their side seems to be coming scriptural. Are they forcing it? Yes. Are the play acting it? They're making it happen because it's their script. No, it's got to happen. Whether they're following it or not, it's got to happen because people are going to believe in a Messiah. A lot of people won't understand really what it means because how could we understand it? The Bible says the sky will open up, everybody will see him. Anybody who says, "Here I am," don't believe him. But how many people are reading that? And how many people are being preached that from those established churches that all say that they agree with that Bible, yet they all seem to go against it? And the Catholics are the leading entity, aren't they, again? And they're pointing to, you can sit in a box and tell a bloke what you've done and he can forgive you and intercede for you. And the Bible says, don't do that.
Folk religion.
So, exactly. And people are going to follow that because they don't believe that they need that saviour, that repentance, because they're covered and they've been taught that. So how does that work?
Well,
you know, if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, Alex, so everybody's got to get to the point where everybody will have that, you know, everybody at some point will have that feeling, which way are you going? This is it. This is your chance. Which way are you going?
Yeah, well, I think I'm just going to segue across because I think Taylor's probably fallen victim to this 1 hour difference, and we're just at 10 o'clock. So I think he'll turn up in about 15, 20 minutes. He'll turn up in 15, 20 minutes. But I just wanted to, just by way of pulling that together, just to show again that it isn't just, say, Roman Catholicism and stuff. Even in the mainstream churches now, if you look at the genealogies in Matthew 1, you've got Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth the Moabitess. Now, Moabites couldn't be in the congregation of the people down to the 10th generation, and yet they're part of Jesus' bloodline. Also, Rahab, Ruth, and Tamar, all their stories are connected because they're not strict Jews, you know. Two of them are, of the women in there, but two of them are Gentiles. But the point is, they've all got connection with Nephilim concepts. They involve, and I think the other one is Bathsheba, who David committed adultery with. Basically, all these women got involved in using cosmetics and things like this. You know that the Watchers were guilty of sharing that knowledge. So you've actually got 4 women in the genealogy of Jesus right at the beginning, where Matthew is telegraphing that Jesus redeems even bloodlines that are not purely Jewish, because there's some of that non-Jewish bloodline that he's come down from. So he redeems that. It's not through ethnic purity. And a lot of these women in their stories who were chosen have got strong connotations to Nephilim type transgressions. You know, it's cosmetics, seduction. David seduced Bathsheba. He was looking down from a high rooftop. Well, these watchers came down from heaven and transgressed and came down and crossed that boundary, went into women. So there's a clear references to the watchers in the first chapter of Matthew's gospel, for those who are aware of it. And also then it shows you that Jesus is redeeming an imperfect bloodline. Even his own bloodline got affected, you know, by blood that wasn't pure blood. But if it hadn't been that way, you know, I mean, a virgin birth, you know, so it's not quite the same as a Nephilim situation with an angel going into a woman. There's nothing sexual about it, but it requires a remedy that basically zeroizes the ticket on all these transgressions. And as we know, a lot of the time people think it was just because of some myth in Eden, and that there was some simple forbidden fruit that was about knowledge of good and evil, as if that's all there was to it. There was a lot more going on with evil, a lot more corruption, a lot more tainting than even is acknowledged in the Christian church. And we need to retrieve that knowledge, because all these transgressions are coming back. The Nephilim stuff, all coming back with transhumanism. So, you know, you tend to get at the beginning, you know, you're born with no hair and no teeth, and you die with no hair and no teeth. It's like the beginning of the story and the evil that begins to appear. You would expect at the end that that story magnifies in intensity again. And that's what we've got going on here with all these types of transgressions that we see. It's all boundary violations. It's everything that turns law and order upside down. So, you know, we're dealing with some pretty hardcore transgressions.
That's a lot to take in, then, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a lot to take in to see a worldwide societies, different nations who have now become into such a position, so accepting of things that is completely against the word of God, including established churches. You know, C of E alone, there's no Protestant. The Catholics agree there's no Protestants anymore. They all agree on back to where it is. But when you see this established church that goes against the word of God, yet claims Christ, then you're wondering, well, what Christ? What anointed one are you talking about? Why have you got a tomb for Lucifer at the Vatican? There's all these questions that then you get to, oh, it's symbolic. Well, that just means you don't know what it means. You know, if you go to a church and you just get the schematics, the basics of the Bible, if you can call it that, you know, a really nice story based on a parable, it can have a lot of meaning and have a lot of insight for people. I've been privy to a few from Dave, you know, where his messages have been brilliant and spot on, and he teaches what's in the Bible. But people are sitting in churches where they're just getting you know, it's like picking a card every morning for the best affirmation. It's that type of thing, and that's not even that. Is that lukewarm? Because you don't realize how important this could be. You know, the fact that it could be so important. You know, I've got friends who'll say to me that they're Christians, but then they'll say to me, "Oh, do your thing and pray. Then go and read your scriptures." And it's like, what are you talking about? You know, and then you'll get somebody who'll give you Buddha beads, and you say they're blessed by holy ones. I went, but the Buddha beads, they're not for me. They're not for a Christian. They're not. So it's like they don't understand what the differences are, because I certainly didn't. I've said many times I had Catholic friends. I went to C of E. Both to be supposed to be talking about the same thing, yet, you know, my mum didn't like Catholics because of the stuff in Liverpool. It's just crazy stuff. My wife's father wouldn't go to a marriage in a C of E, and my mum wouldn't go to a Catholic, but they both agreed Methodist. It was just all non-conceptual. But I always wanted to know what there was after this life. But anything could have been, it could have been anything. So, in other words, where I was at, it didn't matter what you believed in, because nobody really knew until at the end of it. But when you realize that while you are out there saying, well, nobody really knows, there's one man that stood there and said, hello, I'm the only way. See this book? We wrote it. God wrote this book. Believe it. Everybody else says, yeah, he did, but, or, well, no, it's been corrupted. It's Well, hang on a minute. Let me look at it then. And let me not look at the comic book version, and let me not go to somebody who teaches a watered down version, because I've had enough of this research. I've had enough of no fulfillment. I want something to understand. But it was only the marriage of brokenness, Alex, you know, despair. You know, you've seen one of the poems that I wrote, where I was on my knees, I offered up my despair. And that's when something changed, something happened. And I opened this Bible and I just went, wow, now I understand, because all them subtle changes, all them subtle lies make people feel comfortable with the world. When things are uncomfortable in the world, people get angry, people get agitated. That's why you see a lot of people who, you know, truly believe in Jesus and believe in the Bible. But when you challenge what they truly believe, like Lucifer is Satan, they can get a bit angry. It's just, no, well, we've got to have the one truth. You know, we can both be wrong, but we can't both be right. You know, I'm right if I stick with the truth. And if we say that the word of God is true and it can be tested, then let's go. And it just holds up to everything else, to whichever one you want. It doesn't matter what you point at. And I certainly can't look in the mirror and point at me and say, you're the one. You're going to become God and do this. Because how do you do that? Because there's no precedent for it. But when we look in scripture, we can see precedent for it. But we also have a background and a context for it. And that's why it's important that people not only say, well, I understand this bit about why council tax shouldn't be paid. If your bit is because it funds terrorism, that's correct. But if you're going to go to court and put your house on that, then I think that's folly. I don't think that's a good lesson to go and learn. There's easier lessons. You know, the conditional acceptance stuff, that all holds things. But how do we remedy that afterwards? You know, I speak about root causes. If there's a problem with the property being registered in the title that somebody can pretend, you know, it's like if I've signed something, Alex, without reading it, and somebody takes my car, and then I get all upset about it, and then when it's investigated, I've signed something that said that Dave can use it between 12 and 6 on a Tuesday. Well, you didn't tell me that. Well, it also says in the agreement that I don't have to tell you. You know, it's learning. We've been taught wrongly, and we were taught it by the people who, you know, had the best intentions for us. But they all had their own traumas, and from a societal trauma, based on trauma, there's a lot of trauma. So there's a lot of healing to be done, mate. So, anyway, mate, we've gained the hours back that the tech demons fought with.
Yeah,
we've gone over 2 hours. Do you want to do us a bit of summing up? It has been a bit deep, this one tonight. It's been interesting.
Yeah, it has. I would, what would I say? By summing up. I think that when things are like they are in this world, increasingly, I would parallel that with a storm, an ongoing storm. And the only thing you can do at a time like that usually is batten down the hatches. And I think that's one way to view it defensively. The other way is like Jesus said about the parable of the wise and foolish builders. If you build your house on a rock with the right materials, it has the best chance of withstanding the conditions. And for me, everything that we've looked at tonight is describing, as we always do from as many angles as possible, just what this corrupt system is like, how much of it is an illusion, how much of it is a culture war. We don't know where the next attack's coming from half the time. So we've just got to be vigilant. There's so much we have no control over. There's so much that's decoying. And yet also we're taking these punches from, all kinds of directions. And so we're taking blows, and you need resilience for that. And, again, I would say people really need to ditch narrow and shallow views of truth. They need to try and muster enough interest to still keep their life vital and actually proactively show concern and an interest towards other people. Because once we become totally absorbed with the problems, we can't see past the rim of the teacup, and that level of self-absorption isn't going to end up as a good place to be in. So I would say people need to look at getting the foundations right. They really need to be reevaluating the foundations of their life and establishing whether they're really going to be able to be fit for purpose for the coming months, maybe year or two, because it's going to get tougher.
Yeah, and I think it's how aware can people be to the point where it's on the doorstep? Because when there's enough that's gone on, people will get into that. Well, you've already got people in Stockholm syndrome, but then you've got the people who will just go, well, what should I do? And then the government or a white coat with a clipboard will say, do this. And people will do it. We've seen it in the last 5 or 6 years. So, it's we can only do what we can do, Alex. It's from experience and trying to tell people, you get targeted, you get disallowed. You can't say things like that. You can't tell the truth because people's bank accounts suffer. But people are committing fraud against the general public and each other every day, and they don't know it. Why? Because that's life. That's what they've been taught. And I think it's good to see people who want to do decent things because they've had enough. But it's the people who want to know, want to understand how we got like this, instead of just blaming everybody else. I mean, if you are still thinking that voting's going to change anything, I don't know what to say, because you see all the same faces. So it's it is what it is. If it quacks, what is it?
Yeah,
Must be a cow.
It's a quacker.
Must be a cow. Thanks to everybody who's watched live and who's been in the chat room. Not had much interaction with the chat room with how the conversation went, but thanks for everybody who stuck with us, and thank you to all those who were watching through the week. I think we've said enough for tonight. We've just got to hopefully see people pick up the torches, find the light switch, turn it on. Night, God bless, guys. See you next week.
days of Jerry, the Watchers made their descent. They'd seen the beauty of women, a sight from which they would not repent. Semjaza, taught with temptation, was afraid alone he would pay the price, binding mutual imprecations, and curse themselves to sacrifice. Chiefs of 10 set about the plan. Women ripe for seduction, seduced by knowledge not meant for men. A world of their own construction, hidden knowledge revealed. Men filled with pride, makings of sword and shield, showing how humanity died. Descendants of lust, descendants of pride. Brother would kill brother, no stemming the tide. There was giants in the earth in those days. Flesh, foul and beast under corruption, God's creation desecrated by Nephilim interruption. The cries were heard at the gates of heaven, and the angels witnessed the blood being shed. The earth will be left without inhabitants as all flesh is become dead. Michael spoke to the Lord. You see what Azazel has done, teaching weaponry and war. Has his time not come? Bind Azazel hand and foot in the prison of Dudael. Cover him with jagged rocks in darkness in preparation for hell. When the Watchers heard this, they cried and gnashed their teeth. They summoned a scribe named Enoch in order to petition relief. Descendants of lust, descendants of pride. Brother would kill brother, no stemming the tide. There was giants in the earth in those days. Flesh, foul and beast under corruption, God's creation desecrated by Nephilim interruption. Enoch, go and tell the Watchers that they shall have no peace. Their suffering and anguish shall not cease. They should interject for men and not men for them. Go and tell them they shall watch their children butcher one another until the day of consummation. Flesh, foul and beast under corruption, God's creation desecrated by Nephilim interruption. The Lord sent Uriel to Noah and say, hide yourself for judgment day. That day shall see a mighty deluge. But for Noah and his family, into his rest they enter the ark. Two of each to start again. 40 days of light and dark until the earth was dry again. Sealed door open, mountains of Ararat, and the remnant venture out for his grandsons not to be tortured. Noah prayed to the Lord.